The rain hammered against the windows of downtown Seattle with the kind of relentless intensity that made even lifelong Pacific Northwest residents pause and take notice. Michael Chen pulled his silver BMW into the executive parking garage of Chen and Associates Financial Planning, the windshield wipers struggling against the torrential downpour that had transformed the city's streets into rivers of reflected neon and brake lights. The merger meeting in Portland had been scheduled to run until nearly midnight, a grueling session with lawyers, accountants, and corporate executives all fighting over percentage points and liability clauses. Michael had prepared for the long haul, had even texted Sarah to let her know he might not make it home until after she was asleep. But sometimes, miraculously, efficiency prevailed over corporate posturing. The deal had closed 3 hours ahead of schedule, leaving Michael with an unexpected gift: time to catch up on the mountain of paperwork waiting on his desk before heading home to his wife of 24 years. As he gathered his leather briefcase and laptop bag from the passenger seat, Michael reflected on how much his life had changed since founding the firm 15 years ago. What had started as a one-man financial planning operation in a shared office space had grown into a respected firm with 43 employees, managing over $800 million in client assets. Success had brought comfort, stability, and the kind of professional recognition he'd dreamed of during his years grinding through night classes at the University of Washington Business School. The elevator carried him smoothly to the 15th floor, its polished steel walls reflecting his image back at him. A 49-year-old man who'd maintained his runner's build despite too many client dinners, his black hair now threaded with silver at the temples, his dark eyes showing the kind of focused intelligence that had built his reputation in Seattle's competitive financial services market. He looked like what he was, a successful businessman heading home after closing another significant deal. The familiar soft chime announced his arrival at the Chen & Associates floor, and Michael's keycard beeped as he swiped it through the security reader. The reception area greeted him with its usual understated elegance: warm wood paneling, comfortable leather furniture, and carefully chosen artwork that projected both success and trustworthiness. This was the face his company presented to clients, and Michael had invested considerable time and money ensuring it conveyed exactly the right message. But tonight, something felt different. The reception area was dimly lit, illuminated only by the soft glow of security lighting and the spill of brighter light coming from the direction of his private office. Through the glass doors that separated the executive suite from the main reception area, he could see that someone was still here, working late into the evening. "Rebecca?" he called out, setting his briefcase down by the mahogany reception desk that his assistant kept meticulously organized. Rebecca Martinez had been with the firm for 2 years, and in that time, she'd become indispensable. She managed his schedule with military precision, handled difficult clients with diplomatic skill, and had an almost supernatural ability to anticipate his needs before he articulated them. "I'm back early." The merger closed ahead of schedule. The familiar scent of vanilla and cinnamon greeted him. Rebecca had started bringing in small candles a few months ago, claiming they made the office environment more welcoming for clients. Michael had initially been skeptical of the personal touches, but he had to admit the subtle fragrance was pleasant and seemed to put visitors at ease. It was one of many small improvements Rebecca had suggested that had enhanced their office environment. His words died in his throat as he approached his private office and caught sight of what was happening inside. Rebecca was standing behind his desk, her back to the door, silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline. She was wearing her usual professional attire, a well-tailored black dress that struck the perfect balance between stylish and conservative, her dark hair pulled back in the elegant chignon she favored for client meetings. But something was wrong with this picture, something that made Michael's pulse quicken and his mouth go dry. Around her neck, catching the light from his desk lamp and sparkling with unmistakable brilliance, was Sarah's grandmother's necklace. The vintage piece was a family heirloom that had been passed down through 3 generations of Sarah's family. Cultured pearls the size of small marbles, interspersed with diamonds that had been cut in the Art Deco style, all set in platinum that had aged to a warm, lustrous patina. It was the kind of necklace that belonged in museum cases or safety deposit boxes, not worn casually on a Wednesday evening in a downtown office building. Sarah treasured that necklace above almost any other possession she owned. She wore it only on the most special occasions: their wedding anniversary, the firm's annual charity gala, Christmas Eve dinner with her parents, the night they'd celebrated his promotion to the city's 40 under 40 business leaders list. The piece lived in their bedroom safe at home, nestled in its original velvet-lined box, protected by both security systems and the reverence Sarah felt for her family's history. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he gripped the doorframe, his mind racing through possible explanations for what he was seeing. How had Rebecca gained access to their home? When had she been in their bedroom, in their private safe? How long had this been going on? The questions multiplied faster than he could process them, each one more disturbing than the last. Rebecca was holding something in her hands, what appeared to be a photograph, and studying it with an intensity that suggested deep personal significance. She was completely absorbed in whatever she was looking at, her usual professional composure replaced by something raw and vulnerable. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her head bowed, and even from behind, Michael could see that she was crying. The soft classical music playing from her phone had masked the sound of his arrival. Vivaldi's 4 Seasons, Winter, played softly through the small Bluetooth speaker she kept on the credenza, a piece she'd told him helped her concentrate during long evening work sessions. The irony of the music's melancholy beauty, contrasting with the shocking scene before him, wasn't lost on Michael. Through the windows behind Rebecca, Seattle's skyline stretched out in all directions, the city's lights twinkling like earthbound stars through the rain-streaked glass. The Space Needle was barely visible through the storm, its iconic silhouette softened by the weather. On clear nights, this view was breathtaking, one of the reasons Michael had chosen this particular office space. Tonight, the storm seemed to mirror the emotional turbulence building inside him. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket, the vibration startling him back to the present moment. A text from Sarah appeared on his lock screen. "How did the meeting go? I know you said it might run late, but I'm making your favorite pasta just in case you get home at a reasonable hour. Love you so much. Drive safely in this weather." The normalcy of his wife's message felt surreal against the shocking reality of what he was witnessing. Sarah was at home, probably in their kitchen, preparing dinner and thinking about their evening together. She had no idea that her most precious piece of jewelry was currently draped around the neck of his assistant, 23 floors above the Seattle streets, in circumstances that Michael couldn't begin to understand or explain. 24 years of marriage had taught Michael that human behavior was complex, that situations weren't always what they initially appeared to be, and that jumping to conclusions often led to unnecessary pain and misunderstanding. But as he watched Rebecca trace the necklace with her fingers, in a gesture that seemed almost reverent, he felt his entire world shifting beneath his feet. The rain intensified against the windows, creating a percussive soundtrack that seemed to emphasize the gravity of the moment. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed shut, probably the security guard making his evening rounds. The sound echoed through the office space, and Rebecca startled, her hand flying to her throat where the necklace lay against her skin. She turned quickly, her dark eyes wide with alarm, and for a moment they stared at each other across the span of his office. Michael saw fear in her expression, yes, but also something else. Guilt, certainly, but beneath that, a deeper emotion that looked almost like relief. "Mr. Chen," she whispered, her voice barely audible over Vivaldi's strings and the storm outside. Her hand remained at her throat, fingers touching the pearls as if they were a lifeline. I can explain." But even as she spoke the words, Michael wondered if he wanted to hear the explanation. Not yet. Not when his mind was still reeling from the implications of what he'd discovered. Rebecca Martinez, the woman he'd trusted with his business correspondence, his client relationships, his professional reputation, the woman Sarah had welcomed into their social circle, had invited to their summer barbecue, had spoken of with genuine affection, was wearing his wife's most treasured possession in circumstances that suggested a betrayal so profound he couldn't yet wrap his mind around it. The photograph in Rebecca's hands fluttered slightly as her grip loosened, and Michael caught a glimpse of what appeared to be two women, one of whom looked remarkably familiar. But before he could process that detail, Rebecca was speaking again, her voice stronger now but still trembling with emotion. "Please," she said, taking a small step toward him, "let me tell you what this is really about. It's not what it looks like." Michael remained frozen in the doorway, his hand still gripping the frame, his eyes moving between Rebecca's face and the necklace that caught the light with every breath she took. The classical music continued its melancholy progression, and the rain showed no signs of letting up. Outside, Seattle went about its evening routine, people heading home from work, couples meeting for dinner, families gathering around television sets. While inside this 15th floor office, two people faced each other across a chasm of broken trust and unspoken secrets. The weight of the moment settled over them like a physical presence. Michael realized that whatever Rebecca was about to tell him would change everything, not just their professional relationship, but the entire foundation of assumptions upon which his life was built. Some truths, once spoken, could never be unheard. Some secrets, once revealed, altered the landscape of reality itself. He looked at Rebecca's face, really looked at her for perhaps the first time in their 2 years of working together, and noticed details he'd somehow missed before. The elegant line of her cheekbones, the particular shade of green in her dark eyes, the way she held her head when she was nervous or uncertain. Features that, now that he was really paying attention, seemed hauntingly familiar. "Explain," he said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion and the weight of impending revelation. "Explain everything." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, and carefully placed the photograph face up on his desk, where the light from his lamp illuminated it fully. When Michael saw what the image contained, his breath caught in his throat, and he realized that the evening's surprises were only just beginning. "Don't move," Michael said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that had been developed through years of difficult client negotiations and boardroom confrontations. He stepped fully into his office, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. The soft click of the latch seemed to echo in the sudden tension that filled the room. Rebecca's hand flew to the necklace at her throat, her dark eyes wide with a complex mixture of emotions. Fear, yes, but also something that looked like resignation, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for a very long time. In the soft glow of the desk lamp, she looked younger than her 31 years, more vulnerable than the composed professional she presented during business hours. "Mr. Chen, please," she began, her voice carrying a slight tremor that betrayed the emotional storm beneath her usually calm exterior. "I know how this must look to you. I know what you must be thinking, but I need you to understand that I would never, ever steal from you or Mrs. Chen. This isn't what it appears to be." Michael moved closer to his desk, his eyes never leaving her face, studying her expressions with the same analytical intensity he brought to complex financial portfolios. "Then explain what it is, Rebecca. Explain how you're wearing my wife's grandmother's necklace. Explain what you're doing in my office after hours, going through what appears to be personal documents." He gestured toward the photograph that now lay face up on his desk blotter. "And explain why you're crying over a picture I've never seen before." The photograph showed two women, both appearing to be in their late teens or early 20s, standing together in what looked like a park setting. One of them bore such a striking resemblance to Sarah that Michael's first thought had been that somehow Impossibly, it was his wife at an age when he hadn't yet known her. But the clothing, the hairstyles, the quality of the photograph itself suggested it had been taken decades earlier. Rebecca took a shuddering breath, her fingers still touching the pearls at her throat. "I can't take it off," she whispered, so quietly he almost didn't hear her. "Not yet. Not until—" "Can't take it off?" Michael's voice rose slightly, 2 years of professional trust and personal respect beginning to crumble with each passing moment. "Rebecca, what the hell is going on here? How long has this been happening? Do you have access to our house? Have you been stealing from us?" "No!" The word burst from her lips with such vehemence that Michael took a step backward. "I've never been to your house, Mr. Chen. I've never taken anything that didn't belong to me. This necklace—" She paused, struggling with words that seemed too large and too dangerous to speak aloud. "This necklace was my grandmother's first." The admission hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Michael stared at her, his mind racing through the implications of what she'd just said. "That's impossible. That necklace has been in Sarah's family for 3 generations. It belonged to her great-grandmother, then her grandmother, then her mother. And before that," Rebecca said, her voice gaining strength as she committed to whatever truth she was about to reveal, "it belonged to mine." She reached for the photograph with trembling hands, turning it so Michael could see it more clearly. "The woman on the left," she said, pointing to the figure who looked so much like Sarah, "is my mother, Elena Martinez. Her maiden name was Morrison." Michael felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Morrison was Sarah's maiden name. He moved closer to the desk, studying the photograph with new eyes, seeing not just the resemblance to his wife, but the unmistakable family features, the shape of the eyes, the curve of the smile, the particular way both women held their heads when they were happy. "Morrison," he repeated slowly, the pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to form a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see. "Elena Morrison Martinez," Rebecca confirmed. "Sarah's sister." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He sank into the chair across from his desk. The client chair, he realized with distant irony, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. "That's not possible. Sarah doesn't have a sister. She's an only child. Her parents would have told us." Rebecca's laugh was bitter and broken, carrying decades of pain and disappointment. "Would they? The same parents who told the entire family and community that Elena was dead when she was actually very much alive, working 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. The same parents who chose their social reputation over their own daughter." Michael's mind raced back through 24 years of conversations with Sarah's parents, Catherine and Robert Morrison. They were formal, reserved people who had always seemed to carry some unspoken sadness, some weight of history that they never discussed. Sarah had mentioned once, early in their relationship, that her parents had lost a child before she was born, a tragedy they'd never been willing to discuss in detail. "You're telling me," he said slowly, each word feeling heavy and strange in his mouth, "that Sarah doesn't know she has a sister?" "Sarah doesn't know she has a sister, and she doesn't know she has a niece," Rebecca confirmed, tears flowing freely down her cheeks now. "My mother made me promise when I took this job that I would never tell her. She said it would only bring pain to everyone involved, that some secrets were better left buried." Michael stared at the photograph, seeing it with new understanding. The teenage girl standing next to Elena, Rebecca at perhaps 16 or 17 years old, had the same bone structure as Sarah, the same elegant neck, the same way of standing with one hip slightly cocked. How had he never noticed the family resemblance? How had Sarah never seen it? "But the necklace," he said, still struggling to comprehend the full scope of what Rebecca was telling him. Rebecca's fingers went to the pearls at her throat, touching them with a reverence that was clearly deeply personal. "Our great-grandmother, mine and Sarah's, had 2 of them made in 1943, identical pieces intended for her daughters. When my mother was 17 and pregnant with me, when her parents gave her the choice between giving up her baby or losing her family forever, she took her necklace with her. It was the only piece of her family she was allowed to keep. Michael thought about the stories Sarah had told him about her grandmother's necklace, the family legend that it had been a one-of-a-kind piece, specially commissioned for Sarah's great-grandmother. Another lie, he realized. Another piece of family history that had been carefully edited to remove any trace of the daughter who had been erased from their narrative. "Why now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you here tonight in my office, looking at this photograph? Why are you wearing the necklace now?" Rebecca wiped tears from her cheeks, smearing her usually perfect makeup. Without the careful professional facade, she looked heartbreakingly young and vulnerable. "Because my mother is dying, Mr. Chen. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors say she has 2 weeks left, maybe 3 if she's lucky." The storm outside seemed to intensify, rain lashing against the windows with renewed fury. Michael felt as though he were drowning in revelations, each one more overwhelming than the last. "She wants to see Sarah," Rebecca continued. "She's wanted to see her sister for 33 years, but she was too afraid of being rejected again. Now she's running out of time, and she finally found the courage to ask me to try to arrange a meeting. So you took a job with me to get close to Sarah." "Yes." The admission was simple and direct. "I saw your company's listing for an executive assistant position 2 years ago. I just finished my MBA at Portland State, had excellent references from my previous job. It seemed like fate, maybe. A way to observe Sarah from a distance, to get to know what kind of person she was, to see if she might be open to learning about her sister." Michael understood the logic, even as he recognized the massive deception involved. "But you've been working for me for 2 years, Rebecca. 2 years of daily interactions, coffee breaks, late nights working on client presentations. Why didn't you tell her who you were?" Rebecca stood and moved to the window, staring out at the storm-lashed city below. "Because I was terrified," she said simply. "Terrified that she'd reject me the way our grandparents rejected my mother. Terrified that she'd be angry about being lied to her whole life. Terrified that learning about us would destroy the happiness she'd built with you." She turned back to face him, and in her profile, Michael could see Sarah's features clearly reflected. "And if I'm being completely honest, I was terrified that she might be perfectly happy without us, that maybe our grandparents were right, that everyone was better off with Elena Morrison dead and buried." Michael thought about Sarah at home, making his favorite pasta, probably humming to herself as she worked in their kitchen. His wife, who had always felt somehow incomplete, who had often wondered aloud what it would have been like to have siblings, who had mentioned more than once that she felt like an outsider in her own family. "Rebecca," he said carefully, "I need you to understand something. This isn't just about you and your mother anymore. Sarah has built her entire identity around being an only child, around the family narrative your grandparents created. Learning that she has a sister, that her parents have been lying to her for 38 years, it's going to devastate her. Do you think I don't know that?" Rebecca's composure finally cracked completely, years of suppressed emotion pouring out. "Do you think I haven't been lying awake at night for months thinking about this? Every time she mentioned her parents, every time she talked about wishing she'd had siblings growing up, I felt like I was stabbing her in the back just by sitting there and saying nothing." She moved away from the window, beginning to pace around his office with nervous energy. "But my mother is dying, Mr. Chen. She lies in that hospital bed in Portland every night, wondering if she made the right choice all those years ago. She wants to apologize to her sister before she dies. She wants to explain that she never stopped loving her family, even after they turned their backs on her." Michael watched Rebecca's agitation, seeing Sarah's mannerisms in her gestures, her expressions. The way she touched her neck when she was nervous, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way she stood with perfect posture even when she was emotionally distraught. All of it echoed his wife's behavior in ways that should have been obvious. "What about your grandparents?" he asked. "Catherine and Robert, do they know you exist?" Rebecca's pacing stopped. "I don't know for certain, but Mom thinks they might. When my father died in that car accident, I was 3. Someone sent flowers to the funeral, expensive arrangements from Morrison's Flowers, which was the shop our family always used for special occasions. No card, no signature, but Mom recognized the style. The revelation hit Michael like another blow to his understanding of reality. They knew about you. They knew they had a granddaughter, and they never told Sarah. Mom thinks they hired a private investigator at some point, maybe to check on us, or make sure we weren't going to cause problems for the family. But we've never been contacted directly. Rebecca's voice grew bitter. They made their choice 33 years ago, and they've stuck with it. Michael's phone rang, the sudden sound making both of them jump. Sarah's name appeared on the caller ID, and Michael felt his heart skip several beats. "I have to answer this," he said, his thumb hovering over the accept button. "Hey, honey." Sarah's voice filled the office through the speaker, warm and loving and completely unaware of the explosive revelations happening 23 floors above the Seattle streets. "Michael, I was starting to worry. You said the meeting ended early, but that was over an hour ago. Are you okay?" Michael's eyes met Rebecca's across his office, seeing the pain and longing in her expression as she listened to her aunt's voice for what might be the first time. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I stopped by the office to catch up on some paperwork, and I got caught up in a conversation with Rebecca. She was working late on the Henderson presentation." "Oh, tell her I said hello," Sarah said cheerfully, "and remind her that she doesn't need to work so hard. You both put in too many hours as it is." Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob at the casual affection in Sarah's voice. "I'll tell her," Michael managed. "I should be home soon." "Okay, but don't work too late. The pasta is ready whenever you are, and I opened that bottle of wine we've been saving. I thought we could celebrate your successful merger." "That sounds perfect." "I love you, Sarah. Love you too. Drive carefully in this weather." The call ended, leaving them in silence except for the rain and the soft strains of Vivaldi still playing from Rebecca's phone. The normalcy of the conversation with Sarah felt surreal against the backdrop of everything Michael had just learned. "She sounds happy," Rebecca whispered, wiping tears from her cheeks. "She is happy," Michael confirmed. "We both are, which is why what happens next needs to be handled very, very carefully." Rebecca looked at him with eyes that were so much like Sarah's, it was almost painful to see. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'm going home tonight, and I'm going to tell my wife that her assistant is actually her niece, that her sister is dying in a Portland hospital, and that her parents have been lying to her for her entire adult life." He picked up the photograph from his desk, studying the faces of Elena and teenage Rebecca. "And then we're all going to have to figure out how to deal with the consequences." Rebecca's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and terror. "You're going to tell her tonight?" "She deserves to know, Rebecca. Your mother deserves the chance to see her sister before she dies, and Sarah deserves the opportunity to make her own choice about whether or not to take that chance." He stood, straightening his tie and preparing to face the most difficult conversation of his marriage. "The question is, are you prepared for what comes next?" Outside, the storm was beginning to show signs of abating, but Michael suspected the real tempest was just beginning. The truth, once released, would change everything, not just for Sarah and Rebecca and Elena, but for everyone whose life had been shaped by 33 years of carefully maintained lies. He looked at Rebecca one more time, seeing not just his trusted assistant, but his wife's niece, a young woman who had been carrying the weight of family secrets for far too long. "Get your things together," he said gently. "We're going to need to talk to Sarah together, tonight." The drive through Seattle's rain-soaked streets gave Michael 23 minutes to process the magnitude of what he was about to tell his wife. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat of his BMW, clutching the photograph of her mother and herself, her other hand unconsciously touching the necklace that now seemed to burn with significance against her throat. Michael's mind raced through 24 years of marriage, searching for signs he might have missed, clues that could have prepared him for this moment. Sarah had always been somewhat reserved about her family history, but he'd attributed that to her parents' formal, distant nature rather than any deeper secrets. Catherine and Robert Morrison were wealthy, socially prominent Seattle residents who had built their fortune in real estate development. They attended the right charity functions, belonged to the right country club, and maintained the kind of carefully curated public image that old Seattle money demanded. But now, driving through the familiar neighborhoods that had become the landscape of his adult life, Michael realized that their reserve might have been born of guilt rather than breeding. They had erased a daughter from their family history with the same cold efficiency they brought to their business dealings. "Tell me about Elena," he said quietly as they stopped at a red light near Green Lake. "What kind of person is she?" Rebecca's face softened with love and pride. "She's the strongest person I've ever known. When she left home at 17, pregnant, with nowhere to go and no family support, she could have given up. Instead, she found a job as a waitress, saved every penny she could, and put herself through nursing school while raising me." She shifted in her seat, turning slightly toward Michael. "She worked the night shift at Portland General Hospital for 26 years, so she could be with me during the day when I was growing up. She helped me with homework at the kitchen table, drove me to soccer practice, attended every school play and parent-teacher conference. She never once made me feel like I was the reason she'd lost her family." The light turned green, and Michael accelerated through the intersection, his windshield wipers fighting against the persistent drizzle. "What about your father? Carlos, you said?" "Carlos Martinez. He was 20 when he met my mother, worked as a mechanic at a garage in southeast Portland. Mum says he was the kindest man she'd ever known, patient, funny, completely devoted to both of us." Rebecca's voice grew soft with memory. "He died when I was 3. Drunk driver hit his car on his way home from work. Mom never remarried. She said no one could ever live up to the love she'd shared with my father." Michael thought about the loneliness Elena must have felt raising a child alone while nursing the wounds of family rejection. "How did she find out about Sarah's marriage, her success with my business?" "Social media at first, then newspaper articles about your company, mentions in the business journal. Mom wasn't stalking her or anything like that," Rebecca added quickly, "but she kept track. She wanted to know that her sister was okay, that she was happy." They turned onto the tree-lined street where Michael and Sarah had lived for the past 12 years. The neighborhood was quiet and prosperous, filled with craftsman-style homes and well-maintained gardens. It was the kind of place where secrets stayed buried, where family scandals were politely ignored, where people like Catherine and Robert Morrison could maintain their carefully constructed narratives without challenge. "Rebecca," Michael said as they pulled into his driveway, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She nodded, her dark eyes serious. "In the 2 years you've worked for me, have you ever felt conflicted about your relationship with Sarah? Have you ever wanted to tell her the truth?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, staring at the warm glow emanating from Michael and Sarah's kitchen windows. Through the sheer curtains, they could see Sarah moving around the island, probably cleaning up after preparing dinner. "Every day," she whispered finally, "every single day, especially these past few months as Mum's condition has gotten worse. Do you know how many times I've started conversations with her thinking I was going to tell her who I was? And every time I'd lose my nerve." She turned to face him fully. "There was one afternoon, about 6 months ago, when she was having a particularly bad day. She'd had an argument with her parents about something, I can't remember what, and she was upset about feeling disconnected from them. She said something about how she'd always wondered what it would be like to have a sister, someone who understood her family dynamics." Rebecca's voice broke slightly. "I almost told her then. The words were right there, ready to come out. But then she said, 'But I suppose we can't change the family we're born into, can we?' And I realized that telling her the truth might destroy the peace she'd made with her situation." Michael understood the terrible bind Rebecca had been in, wanting to give Sarah the sister she'd always wished for, but terrified that the revelation would cause more pain than joy. "She's going to be angry," he warned gently. "Not at you necessarily, but at the situation, at her parents, at having been lied to for so long. I know, but Mr. Chen, my mother is dying. She's dying, and she wants to see her sister one last time. She wants to apologize for the choice their parents forced her to make, and she wants Sarah to know that she never stopped loving her." They sat in the car for another moment, gathering courage for what was ahead. The rain had tapered off to a gentle mist, and the neighborhood was settling into its evening quiet. Dog walkers moved along the sidewalks, their pets sniffing at familiar territory. Lights were coming on in windows as families gathered for dinner, homework, evening television programs. The normalcy of it all felt surreal against the magnitude of the conversation they were about to have. "Are you ready?" Michael asked. Rebecca nodded, though her hands were trembling as she gathered her purse and the photograph. As ready as I can be. They walked up the flagstone path to Michael's front door, past Sarah's carefully tended flower beds and the Japanese maple she'd planted to celebrate their 15th wedding anniversary. This was home, the place where he and Sarah had built their life together, where they'd weathered job changes and financial stresses and the quiet disappointments of a marriage that had never included children. In a few minutes, everything familiar about this space would be forever changed. Sarah opened the door before Michael could get his key out, her face brightening with the smile that had first captured his heart 26 years ago at a University of Washington alumni mixer. She was wearing her favorite at-home clothes, soft grey yoga pants and one of his old business school sweatshirts, and her blonde hair was pulled back in the messy bun she favoured for cooking and relaxing. "There's my workaholic husband," she said, rising on her toes to kiss his cheek. Then she noticed Rebecca standing slightly behind him, and her expression shifted to surprise and concern. "Rebecca, is everything okay? Did something happen with the Henderson account?" "No, the account is fine," Rebecca said quietly, her voice barely steady. "Mrs. Chen, we need to talk to you about something important, something personal." Sarah's green eyes, so similar to Rebecca's, Michael now realized, moved between her husband and her assistant with growing concern. "Of course. Come in, both of you. Should I make coffee?" "Maybe something stronger," Michael suggested gently, guiding his wife toward their living room. "Sarah, what Rebecca needs to tell you is going to be difficult to hear. I think you should sit down." The living room was a space they'd designed for comfort and conversation. Deep sofas arranged around a stone fireplace, built-in bookshelves filled with their shared library, family photos scattered on side tables and the mantel. It was where they'd had all their most important conversations over the years, where they'd made decisions about career changes and investments, and the gradual acceptance that they wouldn't have children of their own. Sarah settled onto their favorite sofa, tucking her feet under her in a gesture that was purely, uniquely hers. Michael sat beside her, close enough to offer support but giving her space to process what was coming. Rebecca remained standing, clutching the photograph against her chest like a shield. "Rebecca," Sarah said gently, "whatever it is, you can tell us. Are you in some kind of trouble? Do you need help?" The kindness in her voice seemed to break something inside Rebecca. Tears began streaming down her face, and her carefully maintained professional composure crumbled completely. "Mrs. Chen," she began, then stopped, shaking her head. "Sarah, I need to tell you something that's going to change everything you thought you knew about your family." Sarah reached for Michael's hand instinctively, her grip tightening as she sensed the gravity of whatever was coming. "Before I show you this," Rebecca continued, holding up the photograph, "I need you to know that everything I'm about to tell you, I've been carrying alone for 2 years. I need you to know that keeping this secret has been the hardest thing I've ever done, and I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you." "Rebecca, you're scaring me," Sarah said softly. "What kind of secret could be so terrible?" Rebecca moved closer, extending the photograph towards Sarah with trembling hands. "The secret that you have a sister." Sarah's face went completely blank, as if the words hadn't quite registered. She stared at the photograph without taking it, her green eyes moving between Rebecca's face and the image being offered to her. "That's not possible," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have a sister. I'm an only child. My parents would have told me." "Look at the photograph," Rebecca urged gently. "Please, just look at it." Sarah's hands shook as she accepted the picture, and Michael watched his wife's face transform as she studied the two women captured in that moment decades ago. He saw the exact instant when recognition dawned. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, and all the color drained from her cheeks. "This woman," she said, pointing to Elena with a trembling finger, "she looks exactly like you," Rebecca finished, "because she's your sister, Elena Morrison Martinez, my mother." "Betty." The photograph fluttered in Sarah's grip, and Michael reached out to steady her hands. She stared at the image for what felt like an eternity, her mind clearly struggling to process this fundamental revision of everything she'd believed about her family. "Your mother," Sarah repeated slowly, as if testing the words. You're saying your mother is my sister, which would make you your niece, Rebecca confirmed, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm your niece, Sarah. I've been your niece every day for the past 2 years, sitting across from you at staff meetings, having coffee with you in the break room, listening to you talk about wishing you had siblings. Sarah looked up from the photograph, her eyes moving over Rebecca's face with new understanding. That's why you look familiar, she breathed. I always thought there was something, but I never could place it. You have Mom's eyes, and Dad's chin, and my... She touched her own cheek, then reached out as if to touch Rebecca's face before stopping herself. We have the same bone structure, Rebecca said softly. The same hands, the same way of tilting our heads when we're thinking. Michael noticed it tonight. Sarah turned to her husband, her expression a mixture of shock and accusation. You knew about this. How long have you known? I found out 2 hours ago, Michael said quickly. I came back to the office early and found Rebecca there, wearing your grandmother's necklace. That's how this all came out. My grandmother's necklace. Sarah's hand flew to her throat instinctively. Then she noticed what Rebecca was wearing. The pearls and diamonds caught the lamplight, identical to the piece that sat in their bedroom safe. How do you have my necklace? Rebecca's fingers touched the pearls gently. Because it's not just your necklace. Our great-grandmother had 2 of them made, one for each of her daughters. When your parents disowned my mother for getting pregnant at 17, she took her necklace with her. It's been the only connection she's had to her family for 33 years. The weight of revelation seemed to crush down on Sarah all at once. She set the photograph carefully on the coffee table and buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. 33 years, she whispered through her fingers. She's been alive for 33 years, and my parents let me believe she was dead. Rebecca knelt beside the sofa, her professional boundaries completely dissolved. Sarah, she never wanted you to think she was dead. She never wanted to be cut off from you. She was 17 and scared and in love. And when your parents gave her the choice between her baby and her family, she chose me. But she's regretted losing you every day since then. What happened to her? Sarah asked, lifting her head to look at Rebecca through tear-filled eyes. What happened to my sister? Rebecca settled into the chair across from them, and for the next hour she painted a detailed portrait of Elena's life, her struggles as a young single mother, her determination to build a good life for herself and her daughter, her career as a pediatric nurse, her quiet strength in the face of isolation from the family she'd loved and lost. She worked the night shift at Portland General for 26 years, Rebecca explained. Pediatric ICU. She said taking care of sick children helped her feel like she was doing something meaningful with the sacrifice she'd made. All those families she helped through their worst moments, it gave her purpose. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks. Is she married now? Happy? She never remarried after my father died. She said she'd had her great love with Carlos and she didn't need another one, but yes, she's been happy. Different than she might have been with family support, but she built a good life. You said has been. Sarah noticed, her voice tight with apprehension. Is something wrong? Rebecca's composure cracked again. She's dying, Sarah. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors say she has 2 weeks, maybe 3. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She doubled over slightly, as if she'd been punched in the stomach. No, she whispered. No, that can't be right. I just found out I have a sister, and now you're telling me I'm going to lose her. She wants to see you, Rebecca said urgently. She's been afraid to reach out for so many years, terrified that you'd reject her the way your parents did. But now that she's dying, she's found the courage to ask. She wants to meet you, to apologize for all the years of separation, to tell you how much she's loved you from a distance. Sarah looked at Michael, her eyes wild with grief and shock. I have to see her. I have to go to Portland right now, tonight. Honey, Michael said gently, it's after 10 o'clock and you're in shock. Maybe we should wait until morning, give you some time to process all of this. Process? Sarah's voice rose with desperate energy. Michael, I have a sister who's dying, and I've already lost 38 years with her. I don't have time to process. I need to see her before it's too late. She turned back to Rebecca. Where is she? What hospital? OHSU, Oregon Health and Science University Hospital. She's in the palliative care wing. Rebecca's voice was soft with hope and fear. "But Sarah, you need to understand something. She's very weak. The cancer has progressed quickly over the past few weeks. She might not have much energy for long conversations." "I don't care if she can only whisper," Sarah said fiercely. "I need her to know that I didn't know. I need her to know that if I had known she was alive, I would have found her. I would have brought her home." The three of them sat in the living room that had witnessed so many important conversations over the years, but none as momentous as this one. Outside, the last of the evening's rain was tapering off, and Seattle was settling into its nighttime quiet. Inside, a family was being reborn through revelation and pain. "There's something else," Rebecca said hesitantly, "about your parents. About what they knew and when they knew it." Sarah's expression hardened. "Tell me." "My father died when I was 3. Someone sent expensive flower arrangements to his funeral. Unsigned, but from Morrison's Flowers, the shop your family always used. My mother thinks your parents have known about me all along, that they might have hired investigators to keep track of us over the years." The betrayal seemed to hit Sarah in waves. First the sister she'd never known existed, then the dying diagnosis, now the realization that her parents had actively maintained the deception even when they knew about their granddaughter. "They knew," she said, her voice hollow with hurt and anger. "They knew I had a sister and a niece, and they let me grow up alone. They let me spend 38 years thinking I was the only child they'd ever had." Michael watched his wife process layer after layer of family lies, seeing her entire understanding of her identity reshaping itself in real time. The Sarah who had woken up that morning, secure in her place as an only child, trusting in her parents' version of family history, no longer existed. "What do you want to do?" he asked gently. Sarah stood abruptly, purpose replacing shock in her expression. "I want to pack a bag, and I want to drive to Portland tonight. I want to meet my sister, and I want to tell her that I love her even though I've never met her." She looked at Rebecca. "Will you take me to her?" "Of course," Rebecca said without hesitation. "I'll call the hospital and let them know we're coming. Visiting hours are over, but under the circumstances, I think they'll make an exception." "Good." Sarah was already moving toward the stairs, her mind racing ahead to practical considerations. "Michael, can you handle things at the office tomorrow? Rebecca will need the day off, obviously, and I don't know when I'll be back." "Take as long as you need," Michael said, following her. "Take as long as you both need." Oh, as Sarah packed an overnight bag with mechanical efficiency, her mind clearly focused on the journey ahead rather than the emotional complexity of what she was doing, Michael watched Rebecca make the necessary phone calls to the hospital, to Elena, to the night nursing staff who would need to prepare for an unprecedented family reunion. Within an hour, they were back in Michael's car, driving through the empty streets of Seattle toward I-5 South and the 3-hour journey to Portland. Sarah sat in the back seat, clutching the photograph of Elena and teenage Rebecca, studying her sister's face in the intermittent glow of streetlights. "Tell me about her personality," she said to Rebecca as they merged onto the interstate. "Is she funny? Is she serious? What makes her laugh?" And for the next 3 hours, as they drove through the darkness toward a hospital room where Elena Martinez lay waiting for the sister she thought she'd lost forever, Rebecca told Sarah everything she wanted to know about the woman who shared her blood, her history, and now, finally, her future. The drive to Portland stretched through the Pacific Northwest darkness, I-5 South, cutting through forests and small towns that looked like scattered jewels against the black landscape. Sarah had insisted on driving her own car, needing the control and the familiar comfort of her hands on the wheel as she processed the most shocking night of her life. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat, serving as navigator and emotional support, while Michael followed in his BMW, unwilling to let his wife make this journey without backup. They'd called ahead to OHSU Hospital, where the night nursing supervisor had been initially reluctant to allow visitors outside normal hours, until Rebecca explained the extraordinary circumstances. Elena had been awake when Rebecca called her directly, and according to the nurse who'd held the phone to her ear, she'd cried for 10 minutes straight at the news that Sarah was coming to see her. "She keeps asking if this is really happening," Rebecca had reported back. "She's afraid she's hallucinating from the pain medication." Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as they passed the exit for Centralia, still an hour out from Portland. "Tell me more about her work," she said. "You mentioned she was a pediatric nurse. What was that like for her?" Rebecca shifted in her seat, grateful for the darkness that hid her own emotional struggle. Talking about her mother's life was both comforting and heartbreaking, a celebration of Elena's strength and an acknowledgement of how little time they had left together. "She loved working with children," Rebecca began. "She said they were honest in a way that adults weren't. When they were scared, they showed it. When they were in pain, they expressed it. When they were happy, their whole faces lit up. She specialized in working with terminal cases, families dealing with childhood cancer, genetic disorders, accidents that changed everything." Sarah's voice was soft with wonder. "She chose to work with dying children?" She said she understood what those families were going through, the fear of losing someone you loved, the desperation to make every moment count, the weight of decisions that would affect the rest of your life. She could help them navigate that because she'd lived with loss herself. They passed a semi-truck hauling timber south, probably heading for one of the mills in Oregon. The highway was mostly empty at this time of night, just the occasional traveler and the steady stream of commercial traffic that kept the Pacific Northwest's economy moving. "Did she ever talk about me?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "All the time." Rebecca's answer was immediate and certain. "She has a scrapbook, newspaper clippings about your wedding, articles about Michael's business success, photos from charity events where you were mentioned in the society pages. She knows you graduated summa cum laude from UW, that you worked in marketing before you married Michael, that you volunteer with the Children's Hospital fundraising committee." Sarah's breath caught. "She's been following my life? From a distance, yes. She wanted to know that you were okay, that you were happy. When she saw the pictures from your wedding in the Seattle Times Society section, she cried because you looked so beautiful and so joyful. She said you had the same smile she remembered from when you were little." "When we were little," Sarah's voice sharpened with interest. "She remembers me as a child. She's 4 years older than you, so she has memories of you as a baby, a toddler, a little girl. She used to help take care of you when your parents were busy with social obligations. She taught you to ride a bicycle, helped you with your first attempts at reading, made up bedtime stories about princesses who were brave enough to rescue themselves." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she absorbed these glimpses into a childhood she'd never known was shared. "I don't remember any of that. I don't remember having a sister at all." "You were only 4 when she left home," Rebecca explained gently. "And from what Mom has told me about your parents, they were very thorough about erasing her from your life. They probably removed all photographs, packed away anything that might remind you of her, redirected your questions when you asked about the other girl who used to live in your house." Sarah thought back to her earliest memories, a lonely childhood in her parents' large house, the sense that rooms held echoes of laughter she couldn't quite place, the feeling that someone was missing from their family portraits. She'd attributed those feelings to childish imagination, but now she wondered if they'd been memories trying to surface despite her parents' careful editing. "What did she tell you about our parents?" Sarah asked. "About why they made the choice they did." Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, choosing her words carefully. "She said they were products of their generation and their social class. Appearances mattered more than anything. Their reputation in the community, their standing at the country club, their image as a successful family with traditional values. An unwed, pregnant daughter threatened all of that. So they chose their social standing over their child. Mom doesn't see it quite that simply. She thinks they genuinely believed they were protecting the family, including her, by removing the source of scandal. They probably told themselves that she'd be better off starting fresh somewhere else, and that you'd be better off without the complication of a disgraced older sister." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Better off? I spent my entire childhood feeling like something was missing, like our family was incomplete. I used to beg them for a little brother or sister, and they'd always change the subject." They passed the exit for Chehalis, the halfway point between Seattle and Portland. The dashboard clock showed 1:47 a.m., and Sarah realized that in less than 2 hours she would meet the sister she'd never known existed. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" of not knowing what to say to her, of wasting the little time we have left together, of, Sarah's voice broke, of not being the sister she hoped I'd become. Rebecca reached across the center console to squeeze Sarah's hand. Sarah, you became exactly the person she hoped you'd become. You're successful, you're happily married, you're kind and generous and thoughtful. You volunteer your time to help sick children. Do you realize how much that would mean to her? You became everything she dreamed you might be, despite growing up without her influence. But I don't know how to be someone's sister, Sarah protested. I've been an only child for 38 years. I don't know the rules, the expectations, the way siblings are supposed to interact. There aren't any rules, Rebecca said softly. Just be yourself. Be the woman you've always been, and let her love you for who you are. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about the reunion ahead. Sarah found herself studying Rebecca's profile in the intermittent glow of passing streetlights, seeing family resemblances that should have been obvious. The shape of her nose, the way she held her head when she was thinking, the gestures she made when she talked, all of it echoed Sarah's own mannerisms in ways that seemed impossible to have missed. Rebecca, she said eventually, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. In the 2 years you've worked for Michael, have you ever felt like you were living a lie? Have you ever wanted to just tell me who you were? Rebecca's sigh was long and heavy. Every single day, especially in the past 6 months as Mom's condition has deteriorated. There were so many times I started conversations with you, thinking I was going to tell you the truth. What stopped you? Fear, mostly. Fear that you'd reject me. Fear that you'd be angry about the deception. Fear that learning about us would disrupt the happiness you'd built with Michael. And, she paused, struggling with the admission, fear that you might be perfectly content being an only child, that having a sister might feel like a burden rather than a gift. Sarah considered this. I used to fantasize about having a sister when I was little. I'd imagine what she might look like, what kinds of things we'd do together, whether we'd share clothes and secrets and inside jokes. But I never imagined finding out I actually had one under these circumstances. Are you angry? About the deception, I mean? Sarah thought about it seriously. I'm angry at my parents for lying to me my whole life. I'm angry at the situation, at the cancer that's taking Elena away just when I found her. But I'm not angry at you, Rebecca. You were put in an impossible position, and you handled it the best way you knew how. They passed the Oregon border, marked by a simple green sign welcoming them to the state. Portland's lights were beginning to appear in the distance, a cluster of illumination against the dark Columbia River Valley. What do I call her? Sarah asked suddenly. Elena? Mom. I can't call her Mom. That feels wrong after all these years. But just using her first name feels too formal. Let's call her whatever feels right in the moment, Rebecca suggested. She's not going to care what you call her. She's just going to be grateful that you're there. They navigated Portland's empty streets following Rebecca's directions, past the industrial areas along the river, through the quiet downtown and up into the hills where OHSU's campus sprawled across several acres of landscaped grounds. The hospital complex was impressive even in the darkness. Multiple buildings connected by skyways, parking structures tucked into the hillsides, the kind of medical facility that suggested serious cutting-edge healthcare. Michael's BMW followed them into the parking garage, and the three of them walked together through the underground tunnels that connected the parking structure to the main hospital. Their footsteps echoed in the empty corridors, and the antiseptic smell of institutional cleaning products and medical equipment filled the air. The palliative care unit was on the 7th floor, accessed by elevators that moved with whisper-quiet efficiency. The nursing station was staffed by a single night shift supervisor who looked up expectantly as they approached. "You must be Sarah," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Janet, the charge nurse tonight. Your sister has been awake waiting for you. She's very excited but also very weak, so please don't be alarmed by her appearance." Sarah nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. Is she in pain?" We're managing her discomfort as well as we can. She's on a morphine drip, so she might drift in and out of consciousness, but she's been alert and asking about you every few minutes since Rebecca called. They walked down a corridor lined with private rooms, each one housing someone facing the end of their life, with varying degrees of peace or struggle. Sarah could hear the soft sounds of medical equipment, the occasional murmur of voices, the distant television programs that helped patients and families pass the long nighttime hours. Room 717 had Elena's name on a small placard beside the door. Rebecca paused with her hand on the handle. "She's going to cry when she sees you," she warned gently. "She might not be able to talk much at first. And Sarah, she looks different than she did in that photograph. The cancer has changed her physically." Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing her hair and straightening her clothes as if she were preparing for the most important job interview of her life. "I'm ready." Rebecca pushed open the door, and Sarah stepped into her sister's presence for the first time in 34 years. Elena Martinez was propped up in a hospital bed, surrounded by the apparatus of end-stage medical care, IV stands, monitoring equipment, oxygen tubes, and the subtle but unmistakable atmosphere of a life drawing to its close. The cancer had ravaged her body, leaving her thin and fragile. But her eyes, the same green eyes that Sarah saw in her own mirror every morning, were bright with intelligence and emotion. When Elena saw Sarah, her face transformed with a joy so pure and overwhelming that it took Sarah's breath away. "My baby sister," Elena whispered, her voice hoarse from medication and emotion. "You came. You actually came." Sarah moved to the bedside without conscious thought, drawn by a gravitational pull that felt deeper than genetics, older than memory. She reached for Elena's hand, and when their fingers touched, something inside her that had been broken for 38 years suddenly felt whole. "I'm here," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here, and I'm never going to lose you again." The hospital room felt suspended in time as the two sisters looked at each other for the first time in over 3 decades. Elena's face, though ravaged by illness, carried unmistakable traces of the beautiful young woman from the photograph. The same elegant bone structure, the same expressive eyes, the same way of tilting her head slightly when she was overwhelmed with emotion. "You're so beautiful," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with wonder. "Even more beautiful than in the newspaper photos. I've imagined this moment for so many years, but I never dared hope it would actually happen." Sarah settled into the chair beside the bed, maintaining her hold on Elena's hand, as if physical contact could somehow compress 34 years of separation into a single moment of connection. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I didn't know. If I had known you were alive, if I had known what really happened, I would have found you years ago." "Shh," Elena soothed, squeezing Sarah's fingers with surprising strength. "This isn't your fault, baby. None of this is your fault. You were 4 years old when I left. Our parents made choices that affected all of us, but you were just a little girl caught in the middle." Rebecca stood at the foot of the bed, tears streaming down her face as she watched the reunion she'd facilitated but had never been sure would actually happen. Michael remained near the door, giving the family space while serving as a quiet anchor of support. "Tell me about Rebecca," Sarah said, looking from her sister to her niece and back again. "Tell me about raising her, about the life you built together." Elena's face softened with maternal pride. "She's been the light of my life from the moment she was born. Smart, determined, compassionate, everything I hoped she would become despite the circumstances of her conception. She put herself through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, graduated with honors, got her MBA while working full-time. I'm so proud of the woman she's become. And she took a job with Michael specifically to get close to me," Sarah said, glancing at her niece with newfound understanding. "That was my idea," Elena admitted, her voice growing slightly stronger as she focused on the conversation. "When the cancer was diagnosed 6 months ago, I started thinking about all the things I'd regret if I died without doing them. At the top of that list was never trying to reconnect with you, but I was too scared to approach you directly, too afraid of being rejected again." "So you asked Rebecca to spy on me?" Sarah said, but but there was no accusation in her tone, only sadness for the complicated circumstances that had led them all to this moment. "I asked her to observe from a distance," Elena corrected gently, "to get a sense of who you'd become, whether you seemed like someone who might be open to learning about her long-lost family. She was only supposed to work for Michael for a few months, just long enough to get a feel for your character." Rebecca found her voice for the first time since entering the room. "But the longer I worked there, the harder it became to maintain the deception. Sarah, you were so kind to me, so genuinely interested in my life and career. You invited me to your barbecue, asked about my weekend plans, remembered details about my interests. You treated me like family without even knowing we were family." Sarah looked at her niece with new eyes, seeing not just the professional assistant she'd grown fond of, but a young woman who'd been carrying the weight of family secrets while trying to build a relationship with an aunt who didn't know she existed. "That must have been incredibly difficult," Sarah said. "All those times we had coffee together, all those conversations about work and life and relationships. You were living a double life the entire time." "The hardest part," Rebecca said, settling into a second chair that Michael had quietly brought in from the hallway, "was listening to you talk about wishing you had siblings. You mentioned it several times, how you'd always wondered what it would be like to have a sister, how you sometimes felt lonely being an only child. I wanted so badly to tell you that you did have a sister, that you had family you'd never met." Elena turned back to Sarah, her eyes bright with decades of stored-up love and longing. "Tell me about your life, sweetheart. Tell me about Michael, about your work, about the woman you've become. I know bits and pieces from what I could learn from a distance, but I want to hear it from you." For the next 2 hours, as dawn began to lighten the Portland sky beyond the hospital room windows, Sarah shared the story of her adult life. She talked about meeting Michael in graduate school, about their wedding day, about the early struggles of building his business, and the eventual success that had brought them security and recognition. She spoke about her work with the Children's Hospital Fundraising Committee, her love of reading and gardening, her complicated relationship with their parents. "They never talked about you," Sarah said, her voice hardening with anger and hurt. "Not once in 34 years did they mention that they'd had another daughter. They let me believe I was their only child, let me grow up feeling like something was missing from our family without ever explaining what that something was." Elena's expression grew sad, but not surprised. "They made their choice a long time ago, Sarah. They decided that maintaining their social standing was more important than their relationship with me, and they've spent 34 years living with the consequences of that decision." "But they knew about Rebecca," Sarah said, looking at her niece. "Rebecca told me about the flowers at her father's funeral, about evidence that they might have been keeping track of your lives over the years. They knew they had a granddaughter and never told me. The flowers came every year on Carlos's birthday too," Rebecca added quietly, "and on my graduation day from high school, from college, from graduate school. Always expensive arrangements from Morrison's Flowers, always unsigned, but the timing was too consistent to be coincidental." Elena nodded slowly. "Your parents aren't evil people, Sarah. They're just people who made a terrible choice when they were young and have been too proud or too frightened to admit their mistake. They've been watching us from a distance, probably feeling guilty, but not knowing how to bridge the gap they created." "Do you want to see them?" Sarah asked. "Before, do you want me to contact them? Try to arrange some kind of reconciliation?" Elena considered the question seriously, her eyes moving between her daughter and her sister. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Part of me would like the chance to tell them that I forgive them, that I understand they thought they were protecting the family. But another part of me is afraid that seeing them would bring back all the pain of being rejected, of having my own parents choose their reputation over their daughter. What if they've changed?" Sarah pressed gently. "What if 34 years has given them perspective, made them regret their decision? Then they've had 34 years to reach out and try to make amends," Elena replied, with a trace of the strength that had carried her through decades of single motherhood and professional challenges. "The fact that they've chosen to remain silent suggests they're still committed to their original choice." Rebecca leaned forward in her chair. "Mom, you don't have to decide anything right now. You don't owe them forgiveness, and you don't owe them a deathbed reconciliation if that's not what you want. What I want, Elena said, her voice growing softer as fatigue began to overtake her, is to spend whatever time I have left getting to know my sister again. Sarah, would you be willing to stay in Portland for a few days? I know you have your own life, your own obligations, but I'd love the chance to really talk with you. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah said firmly. Michael can handle things at the office, and everything else can wait. I want to hear about your childhood memories, about what I was like as a little girl, about the stories you used to tell me at bedtime. I want to fill in 34 years of missing history. Elena's smile was radiant, despite her physical frailty. I have so many stories to tell you. About the time you tried to teach our cat to read, about the elaborate tea parties you used to host for your stuffed animals, about the way you used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms because you were convinced I was brave enough to protect us both. I still don't like thunderstorms, Sarah admitted with a watery laugh. Michael has to distract me during the worst ones. Some things never change, Elena said, her eyes drifting closed as the pain medication and emotional exhaustion began to take their toll. Rebecca, sweetheart, would you mind getting me some ice water? My throat is getting dry. As Rebecca stepped out to find a nurse, Elena gripped Sarah's hand more tightly. There's something else I need to tell you while we have a moment alone, she whispered urgently. Oh, what is it? Rebecca doesn't know this, but I've been saving money for years. Not much, but enough to leave her something when I die. But more than that, I want her to have family when I'm gone. She's going to need you, Sarah. She's going to need an aunt who loves her, who can share stories about her mother, who can help her feel connected to something larger than herself. Sarah's heart ached at the thought of Rebecca facing her mother's death alone. She'll have me, she promised. She'll have both Michael and me, and she'll have a place in our family for as long as she wants it. Good, Elena breathed, her grip loosening as sleep began to claim her. That's all I wanted to know, that she won't be alone. Rebecca returned with the ice water, followed by the day shift nurse who needed to check Elena's vitals and adjust her medication. As the medical routine resumed around them, Sarah found herself studying her niece with new eyes, seeing not just Elena's daughter, but a young woman who was about to lose her only parent and needed to know she belonged somewhere. Rebecca, she said quietly as they stepped into the hallway to give the nurse privacy, I want you to know that whatever happens with your mother, you're not alone anymore. You have family now, Michael and me, and whatever other relatives you want to claim on our side of the family tree. Rebecca's composure finally cracked completely. She collapsed into Sarah's arms, sobbing with the grief of impending loss and the overwhelming relief of finally being known and accepted by the family she'd observed from a distance for so long. I was so scared, she whispered against Sarah's shoulder. So scared that when you found out who I was, you'd feel betrayed or manipulated. I never wanted to deceive you, but I didn't know how to tell the truth without risking everything. You don't have to be scared anymore, Sarah said, holding her niece tightly and marveling at how natural the embrace felt. We're family now, really and truly. Nothing is going to change that. Michael joined them in the hallway, having given the women space for their emotional reunion while handling the practical matters of extended hospital stays and work responsibilities. I've arranged for us to have rooms at a hotel nearby, he said quietly, and I've cleared our schedules for the rest of the week. Thank you, Sarah said, reaching for his hand while keeping her other arm around Rebecca. I don't know what I would do without you. You don't have to find out, he replied simply. We're in this together, all of us. As the day progressed, a steady rhythm developed around Elena's bedside. Sarah and Rebecca took turns sitting with her, sharing stories and memories, filling in the gaps that 34 years of separation had created. Michael handled practical matters, coordinating with the hospital staff, ensuring Elena's comfort needs were met, managing the business and personal obligations that couldn't be completely ignored. Elena's condition fluctuated throughout the day, sometimes alert and talkative, sometimes drowsy from medication, but always focused on the miracle of having her family together. She told Sarah stories about their childhood, about their parents before bitterness and social pressure had hardened their hearts, about the dreams she'd had for both her daughters' futures. I used to imagine your wedding day, Elena said, during one of her more lucid periods. I wondered what kind of man you'd marry, what you'd look like in your dress, whether you'd be happy. When I saw the photos in the newspaper, I cried because you looked so radiant, so completely joyful. I wish you could have been there, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I wish you could have walked down the aisle with me, helped me get ready, been my maid of honor. I had friends fill those roles, but there was always this sense that someone important was missing. I was there in spirit, Elena said softly. I bought a copy of every newspaper that mentioned your wedding, cut out all the photos, put them in my scrapbook. Rebecca used to tease me about it, but it was the only way I could participate in your happiness. As evening approached, Elena's energy began to flag more noticeably. The nurses increased her pain medication, and she drifted in and out of consciousness more frequently. During one of her alert periods, she asked Rebecca to bring her purse from the small closet in the room. There's something I need to give you both, she said, her hand shaking as she tried to open the worn leather bag. Sarah helped her, and together they withdrew a small velvet-covered jewelry box that was clearly very old. This was our grandmother's engagement ring, Elena explained, opening the box to reveal a delicate platinum band set with a single, perfectly cut diamond. She left it to me when she died, probably because she knew our parents wouldn't approve of me having it. I've been saving it for Rebecca, but now she looked between her daughter and her sister, her eyes bright with an idea that seemed to give her renewed energy. Sarah, you never had children. Rebecca, you're not married yet, but you're both my family, and this ring represents the love that connects all the women in our family, across generations, and despite the barriers people tried to build between us. She closed the box and pressed it into Sarah's hands. I want you to keep this safe. When Rebecca gets married someday, it should be hers, but until then, it belongs with the family matriarch, which I guess is you now, little sister. Sarah accepted the ring box with trembling hands, understanding the weight of what Elena was entrusting to her. I'll take care of it, she promised. I'll take care of both of them, the ring and Rebecca. I know you will, Elena whispered. You have such a good heart, Sarah. You always did, even when you were little. You used to try to rescue injured birds, share your allowance with kids at school who didn't have lunch money, stand up for anyone who was being picked on. That goodness is still there. I can see it in the way you've treated Rebecca, the way you've built your life around helping others. The room fell quiet, except for the soft sounds of medical equipment and Elena's increasingly labored breathing. Rebecca sat on one side of the bed, holding her mother's left hand, while Sarah held the right. Michael remained in the background, a steady presence who understood that this moment belonged to the women who were reclaiming their connection to each other. Mom, Rebecca said softly, is there anything else you need to tell us? Anything else you want us to know? Elena's eyes opened, focusing on her daughter with the fierce love that had sustained them both through 31 years of life together. Just that I'm proud of you. Proud of the woman you've become. Proud of the courage it took to reach out to Sarah. Proud of the way you've handled an impossible situation with such grace and integrity. She turned to Sarah, her voice growing weaker, but her words no less powerful. And Sarah, I need you to know that I never, not for one single day, regretted the choice I made when I was 17. Losing our family was the most painful thing I've ever experienced, but gaining Rebecca was worth every moment of that pain. She's been my greatest joy, my proudest achievement, my reason for getting up every morning. She's remarkable, Sarah agreed, looking at her niece with new appreciation. She's strong and intelligent and compassionate, everything you raised her to be. She's going to need you when I'm gone, Elena said, her eyes beginning to drift closed again. She's going to need someone who knew her mother, someone who can share stories and memories, someone who can help her understand where she comes from. She'll have me, Sarah promised again. She'll have all of us. Elena smiled, an expression of perfect peace and contentment. Then I can rest, she murmured. I can finally rest knowing my girls will take care of each other. Over the next 3 days, Sarah rarely left Elena's bedside. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, dreams for the future, regrets about the past, hopes for Rebecca's happiness. Elena shared stories about her years as a nurse, about the families she'd helped, about the meaning she'd found in caring for others during their most vulnerable moments. Working with sick children taught me something important, Elena said during one of their conversations. It taught me that love isn't diminished by time or distance or even death. The love I have for you and Rebecca, it's been growing for 34 years, even though we were separated. It's been waiting for this moment when we could finally share it openly. Sarah found herself marveling at her sister's wisdom and strength. Despite everything Elena had endured, the family rejection, the years of single motherhood, the struggle to build a career and raise a daughter alone, the devastating cancer diagnosis, she had maintained a fundamental optimism about human nature and the power of love to overcome even the most difficult circumstances. "I want to contact our parents," Sarah said on the third day, as Elena's condition began to deteriorate more rapidly. "I want to tell them that you're here, that you're dying, that this is their last chance to make things right." Elena considered this for a long time, her breathing shallow and labored. "What would you say to them?" "I'd tell them that their daughter is dying in a Portland hospital, surrounded by people who love her. I'd tell them that she's lived a beautiful life despite their rejection, that she's raised an incredible daughter, that she's forgiven them even though they've never asked for forgiveness. And I'd tell them that if they have any love left for the girl they cast out 34 years ago, they need to get in a car and drive to Portland right now. And if they refuse to come," Sarah's jaw tightened with determination, "then they'll have to live with that choice for the rest of their lives. But at least they'll have been given the opportunity to choose love over pride." Elena squeezed Sarah's hand weakly. "Make the call," she whispered. "I may not have much time left, and I don't want to die wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to try one more time." Sarah stepped into the hallway and dialed her parents' number with shaking fingers. Her mother answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the crisp authority that Sarah remembered from childhood. "Sarah, it's rather late to be calling, dear. Is everything all right?" "Mom," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside her, "I'm calling to tell you that Elena is dying." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Sarah wondered if the connection had been lost. "I don't know what you mean," Catherine Morrison said finally, but her voice had lost its certainty. "Yes, you do," Sarah replied firmly. "You know exactly what I mean. Your daughter, the one you told me was dead, the one you erased from our family history, the one whose existence you've been hiding from me for 38 years, is dying of cancer in a Portland hospital. She has maybe 24 hours left, and this is your last chance to see her." Another long silence, then the sound of her mother's sharp intake of breath. "How did you—" Catherine began, then stopped herself. "How did I find out? Her daughter has been working as Michael's assistant for 2 years. Rebecca Martinez is your granddaughter, Mom. The granddaughter you've never met, never acknowledged, never claimed. She's been part of my life for 2 years, and I never knew she was family because you taught me to believe that Elena was dead. Sarah, you don't understand the complexities of the situation." "I understand perfectly," Sarah interrupted, her anger finally breaking through her careful control. "I understand that you and Dad made a choice 34 years ago to prioritize your social reputation over your daughter. I understand that you've spent my entire life lying to me about having a sister, and I understand that Elena has spent 34 years building a beautiful life despite being rejected by her own parents." She took a deep breath, trying to find the words that might penetrate her mother's defensive walls. "Mom, she's a pediatric nurse. She spent her career taking care of sick children, helping families through the worst moments of their lives. She raised an incredible daughter who graduated from college with honors, who has an MBA, who is one of the most professional and capable people I've ever worked with. Elena became exactly the kind of woman you and Dad should be proud to call your daughter." "Where is she?" Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "OHSU Hospital, Palliative Care Unit, room 717. She may not make it through the night, so if you're coming, you need to come now." "We'll be there," her mother said, and Sarah could hear tears in her voice for the first time in years. "We'll leave right away." The call ended, and Sarah returned to Elena's bedside to report that their parents were driving down from Seattle. Elena's response was a mixture of hope and fear. Hope for reconciliation, fear of being rejected one final time. "What if they don't really come?" she whispered. What if they change their minds? Then we'll face that together, Sarah replied, settling back into her familiar chair beside the bed. But Elena, I think they will come. I think 34 years has been long enough for them to understand the magnitude of what they lost when they chose to lose you. 4 hours later, at nearly midnight, Sarah heard familiar voices in the hallway outside Elena's room. Her parents' conversation with the night nurse was muted but unmistakable. The same refined diction, the same careful politeness that had characterized Sarah's childhood. Catherine and Robert Morrison entered the room tentatively, as if they were stepping into a space that might collapse around them. They looked older than Sarah remembered, grayer and more fragile, as if the weight of 34 years of secrets had taken a physical toll. Elena was awake, propped up against her pillows, her green eyes bright with medication and emotion. When she saw her parents, her face transformed with a complex mixture of love, pain, forgiveness, and desperate hope. "Hello, Mother. Hello, Daddy," she said softly, using the childhood names she hadn't spoken in over 3 decades. Catherine Morrison broke down completely, sinking into the chair that Michael quietly provided, her composed facade crumbling as she looked at her dying daughter. "Elena," she sobbed, "my baby girl, what have we done? What have we done to our family?" "You did what you thought was right at the time," Elena replied, her voice carrying a grace that astonished everyone in the room. "You made a choice based on your values and your fears, and you've lived with the consequences. We've all lived with the consequences." Robert Morrison, a tall man who had always projected confidence and authority, looked diminished and uncertain as he approached his daughter's bedside. "Can you forgive us?" he asked simply. "Can you ever forgive what we did to you, to our family?" "I forgave you years ago," Elena said, reaching out a trembling hand toward her father. "I had to, for my own peace of mind. But Dad, I need you to understand something. I need you to understand that the choice you made, it didn't just affect me. It affected Sarah, who grew up without her sister. It affected Rebecca, who never knew her grandparents. It affected all of us in ways that rippled out through decades." Over the next several hours, as Elena's condition continued to deteriorate, the Morrison family had the conversations they should have had 34 years earlier. There were apologies and explanations, tears and tentative expressions of love that had been buried under years of pride and regret. Catherine told Elena about the flowers she'd sent over the years, about the private investigator they'd hired to make sure she and Rebecca were safe, about the nights she'd lain awake, wondering about her oldest daughter's life. "We were cowards," she admitted. "We were too proud to admit we'd made a mistake, too afraid of appearing weak to our friends and community. We told ourselves that you were better off without us, that you'd moved on and built a new life. But the truth is, we were just too ashamed to face what we'd done." Elena listened to these revelations with the same grace she'd shown throughout her illness. "I understand," she said simply. "I understand and I forgive you. But I need you to understand something too. Rebecca is an extraordinary young woman, your granddaughter, and she deserves to have grandparents who are proud of her, who want to be part of her life." "We do," Robert said quickly, looking at Rebecca with eyes that were clearly taking inventory of family resemblances and missed opportunities. "We want to know her, if she's willing to know us." Rebecca, who had been quietly observing this unprecedented family reunion, stepped forward with the poise and dignity her mother had taught her. "I'd like that," she said simply. "I'd like to know my grandparents, to understand where I come from, to be part of a family that's bigger than just Mom and me." Elena smiled, her face radiant with the joy of seeing her family finally, completely whole. "That's all I wanted," she whispered. "That's all I ever wanted, for all of you to love each other the way I've always loved you." Ida. As dawn broke over Portland, casting soft light through the hospital room windows, Elena Martinez died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her daughter, her sister, her parents, and the brother-in-law who had helped make their reunion possible. Her last words, spoken to the room full of people she loved, were simple and profound. "Take care of each other. Promise me you'll take care of each other." 6 months later, Rebecca Martinez Chen stood in Sarah and Michael's backyard, wearing her mother's pearl necklace and her great-grandmother's engagement ring as she prepared to marry David Kim, a fellow MBA graduate she'd met during her transition to the Portland office of Chen and Associates. The wedding was small but perfect. family and close friends gathered under the apple tree that Michael and Sarah had planted in Elena's memory. Catherine and Robert Morrison sat in the front row, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their granddaughter marry the man she loved, finally able to participate openly in their family's celebrations. Sarah served as Rebecca's matron of honor, a role she'd dreamed of playing for a sister she'd never known existed. In her speech at the reception, she talked about how finding her family had taught her that love doesn't diminish with time or distance, that forgiveness is possible even after decades of hurt, and that the most important thing any of us can do is take care of each other. The necklace that had revealed their connection now served as something old for Rebecca's wedding day, carrying with it the blessings of 4 generations of strong women who had loved fiercely despite the obstacles life had placed in their path. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Sarah found herself standing beside Elena's memorial garden, looking up at the stars that were just beginning to appear in the Portland sky. "Thank you," she whispered to her sister, wherever she was. "Thank you for Rebecca, for the chance to know you, for teaching us all what it means to be family." A gentle breeze stirred the lavender plants they'd chosen for the garden, Elena's favorite flower, and Sarah could almost hear her sister's voice carried on the wind. Take care of each other, always take care of each other, and they did.